Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Welcome back to episode 2 with Rich Castro. What a great man with an amazing story. Enjoy. Today on the podcast, we're back in Colorado. I only have so much time for this introduction, so I can't do everything. Here's somebody who not only was running in the 70s, but before. Everything on his running CV would fill me talking for the next hour. He started organizations. He ran everything from the 100-yard dash up to the marathon. A lot of coaching experience at the elite international level, Olympic coach. Welcome today on the podcast, Rich Castro. Hi, Rich.
Good morning. Thank you, Matthew, for having me on.
Apart from the studies that you're doing and your busy life with the university and coaching, were you reading Runner's World, track and field news? Did you fit all those into?
Everything I could possibly. I actually was a correspondent for track and field news. I would submit articles. I would read anything and everything pertaining to running and track and field in the wide literature because of my background. I was reading exercise physiology, the American Journal of Medicine, etc. Anything that I could find that was applicable to what I thought we were doing.
When did your running personally take the change over to longer road racing and all the way up to marathon? How did that happen?
In July of 1973, I ran in the state Colorado championships and I got the bronze medal in the 100 and 200. And then I realized, boy, it's getting hard to train. There's nobody around for me to train with at my odd hours. So I said, I'm going to just take up running. And so I started running for fitness by myself. About a year later, I entered my first competition, a 5K, went out way too fast. I started hanging out with all the guys that were friends of Frank's. So I was learning from them how they trained, what they did, etc. And this also was part of my thrust when I became the cross-country coach for the women. I had never really coached anybody in distances. I ran by the seat of my pants in college. And now I needed to train people and try and get the message across of how we're going to approach this. I ran with the kids so I could learn at the same time what they were doing. So I'm training with them and I'm training with Frank's buddies as often as I can and listening to what they're talking about because they're coming in from all parts of the country. We've got guys from the Midwest. We've got guys from the East Coast. They're talking about their coaches and their training program. So I'm just a sponge.
Who were some of those people?
Steve Flanagan, Shalane Flanagan's dad, was one of my good buddies. He was in graduate school at Colorado and he would swing by and we'd go for runs all the time. He was the guy that actually sucked me into running the very first marathon. He just said, we're going on a road trip. I was driving to California. He says, I'm going to stop by and run the Fiesta Bowl Marathon. I've been invited. They gave me some expense money. So let's drive together. So we did. This is 1977. He says, the race director looks at me and says, what are you doing tomorrow? He says, I'm watching Steve race. He said, why don't you run? He says, you told me that you train with him sometimes. I said, yeah, but not that far. He says, come on down. He says, I'll get you a number. That was my first. I ran fine for the first 2 hours. The end of I think I ran the last 10K in something like 55 minutes. I was jogging at the end, ran like 3:21 because I'd never run that far before. So that was my introduction.
You had mentioned the money payments. When did you see that and accelerating the under the table stuff from appearance money to everything else? Was that taking place before the marathon, before the big road races? What were you seeing there?
It started, I knew about it in Southern California. I had only heard rumors, never knew any amounts or actual people that directly were paid. But there were rumors at the big meets, especially, that guys were getting money to wear shoes, etc. I didn't see it in real life until 1972, when a guy that represented a shoe company, which I'll not name, came to the Martin Luther King games and dropped off shoes 4 athletes that I've helped facilitate. I took them to my hotel room, handed the shoes out to the prospective athletes, and watched an athlete pull out a roll of dollar bills, or I don't know what denomination, out of the toe of the shoe. And so I said, so that's how they do it. That was my first real introduction of knowing that, yeah, this guy was helping this guy.
Okay. What about the Boulder Road Runners Club that you started? How did that come?
I was involved with the Colorado Track Club. I did a fundraiser for them. I had joined the Rocky Mountain Road Runners so that I could do some of those early races. I traveled internationally. I'd been to Brazil, I'd been to Mexico, and seeing these different clubs. And British runners had come into town. I'd become friends with them and learned about their system and heard a lot about their club system. So I delved into that and I started finding out, wow, that sounds pretty cool. I was driving back from Denver after a race with the Rocky Mountain Road. And I said, we should start our own. I said, I want to call us the Boulder Harriers. And so I thought, maybe we'll see what happens. I started running with people that were asking for assistance in the community. They were my age group because I got tired of chasing the Frank Shorter racing team guys and I could never keep up with them. I was a 32-minute 10K guy at that point and I could barely keep them in sight. I said, I'll find people of my own speed that I can train with. Lo and behold, folks were very interested, started coming to my individual sessions and said, we should do this formally more often. So I started setting up Tuesday, Thursday sections on the track. We would meet on the weekends for a run. Then I said, we should formalize this. I looked into the Road Runners Club of America, looked at their bylaws, looked at their insurance program, et cetera, and said, okay, I called a meeting. I was writing a newspaper column in the Boulder Daily Camera just so that I could get the word out about running in general. And I declared that we were going to have a meeting at the public library. Place was packed. And I said, okay, let's vote on this. And they voted that they would do it. They sent up a group of officers. We incorporated the very next month and became the Boulder Road Runners in January of 1979.
What was the mission statement or a vision at that point for it?
To promote running, to promote a good, healthy lifestyle, and to give runners opportunity to come together in different formats and offer opportunities for everybody in the communities. We had a high school representative on the first board.
Oh,
We were forward thinking in terms of getting everybody involved.
were you going down to Potter Field for the training? Were you at, is that
Yeah, Pottsfield. We were at
Pottsfield? Yeah.
Pottsfield and also at the local Boulder High School.
What about Frank Shorter's running store? There were other running stores within commuting distance, a hub of runners. Were you spending time there? And what about the equipment that you were using for your own trip? How had that transformed by
I was a big Adidas guy in college, and then I made the transition to Nike about 76, 77. I liked their waffle trainer, and there was a store that wanted to help me out called Sporting Feet. And so the owner was giving me discounts if I would come in and do talks and things like that and help him meet runners within the community. And I was spending a lot of time at the Frank Shorter team store down on the Pearl Street Mall and with all those guys. So running was literally 24/7 for me. It was going nonstop and the equipment was definitely improving. Nike took notice of me and a couple of their runners that became part of their promotion team asked me to start working with them in the same capacity that I was doing the club, the Frank Shorter racing team. And I started working with Nike, doing the same things, offering different opportunities, making connections for people, helping them come in and do altitude training, etc.
very cool? Look, we probably could talk for hours, and there's no limit here. But let me just throw some more highlights out there to make sure we get to them. Your work with the Ecuador Olympic team, your work with the U.S. Army. You've had some very diverse and exotic experiences. What were those like?
Well, because I work with Nike, the distributor down in Ecuador contacted me, says, we've got some young athletes that show promise. Would you work with them? And I said, let's try one of them and see how it goes. about late 85, Rolando Vera shows up at my doorstep. I have him live with our neighbors 2 doors down so that he has a place to live and he's close to me. And so I incorporate him into the running group and the community, etc. And Rolando starts to blossom. He wins their first ever track medal in the Pan American Games at 10,000. He sets several national records, qualifies for the Olympics. So some of the other athletes start contacting me and saying, "Can we come to Boulder and train with you?" So Martha Tenorio uh, becomes one of the athletes that shows up. She ends up third at Boston Marathon, becoming the South American record holder. Her brother comes, Franklin, and Silvio Guerra comes. So all these guys become part of the mix and the community. My whole thrust at this point is you guys are just part of this whole fabric. You're not a standalone group. And instrumental in all this is my wife, who makes everybody feel at home. She makes friends with a lot of these folks and she interacts. And the community is tremendously involved because they're the ones giving rooms to these athletes and places for them to live and train.
Amazing. What about the Army program? How'd she get?
Jerry Quiller, the guy that was in Boulder when I first arrived, becomes the Army coach at West Point. He retires and is retiring, and the Army is starting to emphasize the World Class Athlete Program, WCAP, they call it. They send a group to meet in Colorado at Fort Carson and then up in Colorado in Boulder. And they want my consultation about which direction they should go. I give them my 2 cents. Shortly thereafter, they said, "We like a lot of your ideas. We like the kind of the blueprint you've laid out. We'd like the athletes to come to Boulder and you're going to be our coach." And I go, "Excuse me?" And they said, "This is what we'd like to try." And I said, "Okay." So a group of freshly minted lieutenants from West Point show up in Boulder, and I worked with them for a couple of years. And we won the first 4K USATF title up in Vancouver. We, what's his name? Brown. Forgetting Brown's first name. He wins 6 national championships. So WCAP is having some great success. Dan Brown, excuse me,
Yeah, yeah.
goes on to become an Olympian. And so I got their program off the ground, and now they've gone in a different direction. As you can tell, they've recruited a lot of Kenyan expatriates, and they're just regular inductees in the Army, and then they pluck them out of there.
2 more things I wanted to ask you about. One is with the change in your running, how did the injuries change for you personally? And were you seeing drug use, other
Well,
rules, things?
I knew it always was there because I knew that there were a lot of risk takers around me. I won't name names, but the sport was filled with people wanting to test the boundaries and see what they could get away with as well as what they could tolerate. And yeah, I knew it was there. And it really depended on the individual, how much of a resource that they had to them. I knew it existed. I knew it existed within the Nike culture in the 80s. And unfortunately, a lot of these folks went unpunished and rewarded for their efforts because they were robbing clean athletes of that opportunity. That's the only lamentation I have. And that's the only real regret I have is that I know that some of these athletes took opportunities away from others.
What about your own running training, the injuries that came with the shift and with aging that we all go through? What were your challenges?
What I was lucky that I never had to really stop and take a long pause because I was able to work with things. I was always reading to find out what we could do better. I was always having resources available to me because we had sports medicine available at CU. So ultrasound, I was always experimenting with ice baths, with inserts, with different types of training shoes. So never had to really take a lot of time out. I was always wanting to find out how we could improve, avoid injuries. Um, we would take those cold water ice baths and stuff back in the 80s. Herb Lindsay and I got into it because we heard about them doing it with thoroughbreds up at the veterinary school up north at Colorado State. So we were doing lots of different things to try and make sure that we would avoid injuries. Weight training, yoga, stretching. I brought Bob Anderson to one of our early clinics, and Bob was big on all the stretching that we were doing. I was doing clinics and trying to disperse all this information. And I was, once again, tapping into every possible source I could. Every time I went internationally, I would make it a point of visiting with a coach that I respected. And I wanted to find out, what are you guys doing? So we started incorporating that. I did a lot of our club training was patterned after the Ethiopians. And we had great success as a club, and we continue to have great success. The Road Runners just won the 70 plus title at
Yeah.
USATF cross country. So we set up a good foundation because we wanted people to gain the best possible information and then make use of it.
Let's talk about the recent marathon success, both in the women's and men with the extraordinary times. What are your thoughts on that?
We obviously know that shoes make a big difference. I have followed that closely. I think it might be better than 4% in some cases, especially if you get a pair of shoes that's tuned specifically to an athlete, which I think is the latest improvisation.
Approach.
Yeah. My son is the head of Puma North America. So I get some information as to what's going on. I still have friends at Nike. I try to find out what's going on out there. They're clearly experimenting and they clearly succeeded in improving footwear tremendously. How big a
You
difference does it make? Obviously, a big difference in terms of can you quantify it? I'm not sure. We just know it's very significant.
have you been running in Pumas for a while then? Or
I have now. Yep. I went away. I had one of my friends was working with Saucony, so I tried their carbon fiber shoes for a while. I tried all the carbon fiber shoes because I've always been very oriented towards lightweight shoes that are flexible. And finally found it. And yeah, now I love the new Puma line is fantastic. I think they've done a great job and I'm sold on their shoes. Trying to be impartial, I think they've done a fantastic job. If anyone wants to give them a try, I think they're well worth it. But any carbon fiber shoe that fits you and you can make use of, you should give it a try. But not all of them are the same.
what's your general thoughts then on the impact of money, technology on the sport? That money being a driver for people maybe to even take more risks on the boundaries of what's legal and accepted. So, good or bad, what do you think about that? Technology and money as the sport has changed from your earliest days over 60 years ago.
I'm old enough to have been around all the technological changes. We went through the Perry O'Brien and we went through the fiberglass pole, the change in the javelin, the different types of shoes that are now event specific, the high jump shoes, all those things made a difference. The Fosbury flop. We've always been impacted. Now technology has really come to the forefront. And I think it's unfortunate the quantum leaps that it's made because we're clearly doing it a totally different sport in the distances. It's radically changed things. Money has ruined it in a lot of ways. I don't like the fact that we have to trash amateurism because the amateurs really never existed. All we were trying to do is exclude certain people. Now the question is clearly the East African population is far better when we come to measurables than the rest of the populations around the world. We know that. They dominate our top 100 easily. Why? Clearly, money has made a big impact with them because their standard of living is greatly impacted by the money they can make in a single event. Are they willing to be greater risk takers? Maybe, but there's also an awful lot of people on the inside exploiting those young, impressionable athletes. So who's to blame? I think maybe both sides there, because you've got folks that want to make an impact and are willing to exploit people that they find dispensable.
Rich, you've received lots of honors in addition to, I'm sure, a lot of satisfaction in your career. You're part of the Colorado Hall of Fame, your College Hall of Fame. What have those meant to you? What's most meaningful for you in those that have come to you?
anytime you're recognized by your peers, it's very gratifying because they're the ones who have witnessed what you've accomplished. And I get an awful lot of thanks for things that people even think I've done because I think I've had a positive impact on our running community in Boulder and the folks that I passed along my journey, the athletes, the other coaches. So when you are recognized by your peers, to me, that's just a tremendous honor. I can't single out any single one. Obviously, being my college Hall of Fame and my coach, being my champion and my mentor meant an awful lot. But the state of Colorado recognizing me, the city of Boulder recognizing me, the university recognizing me, all those were great. And one that was unexpected, it was one called the Robert L. Stearns Award, which is named after a former president at the university for my service to both the community and the university. They've all come my way, and I couldn't single one out as most important, but they're all very meaningful to me.
That's great. Yeah, they're about as high as they get. You've reached those awards really at the pinnacle. I want to thank you for your time. I can tell you that spending an hour and a half with you is just a pleasure. So I am envious of the people who got to spend their running career and learn from you. You're very nice to talk to. It's fun, engaging. I really appreciate your time and your stories. You mentioned your wife being a key part of your running experience, making people feel welcome and everything. How did you meet your wife?
Back in the 70s, I was accepting almost every invitation that came my way to speak. I was doing speaking engagements a couple of times a week sometimes. On a Wednesday before the Boulder, the first one in 79, Cree Kelly owned a store called Fidipides down in Southeast Denver. And Cree said, "Would you be willing to come down there?" And I said, "Sure, I'll come down." And my wife was a frequent client of theirs. And her side of it says that one of the runners in the store had a crush on her. So he called her up and said, "We got a really cool running clinic coming up." And the guy started the women's program at CU. So he's going to talk about women's running and how to get going. I know that you're starting to marathon train and stuff. So you should come down and listen to this guy. I gave my talk. And then I said, the Boulder Road Runners are meeting in Boulder Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you guys are welcome to come. I know it's a ways, but if you want a track session and you want to talk more running, come find me. If you want to join us, just give me your phone number and I'll follow up. Two ladies came up to drop off their phone numbers, and she was one of them. She happened to be a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital. And so I called up and said, "Were you serious about coming up?" And she says, "Yes, very much." She says, "I plan on coming on Tuesday." I said, "Great." I said, "Would you like to have a meal afterwards?" And she said, "I always wondered if he was interested in my running or me." After that, she was a regular and started coming up to our workouts, and we got to know each other very well. And I think it was about 7 or 8 months later, she moved to Boulder. And then we've been married since 81.
Wow, nice story. You posted a picture. This will be delayed before I publish it and get it edited. But you published a picture of a Boulder race
Correct.
on your Facebook. What's the story of that picture?
If you want to know the whole story, it was quite unique to me because once again, I was accepting invitations to get involved with running constantly. There was a town in southeast Colorado, Sterling, Colorado, wanted to put on a race and have a speaker and have kind of their club awards night. They said, "Can you come in on a Friday? We'll put on the race on Saturday and you can help with the timing and announcing. Then you can split after that." And I said, "Sure." So they put me up. I was the speaker at their banquet, helped with the timing the next day, and introduced the winners at the award ceremony. Then I drove back 3.5 hours back to Boulder. And that year, the very first Boulder, most people know it as Memorial Day. That year, they decided to run it on a Sunday afternoon. And I would have never made it to the start line had it not been an afternoon at 2 o'clock race. I drove back to Boulder, parked my car, grabbed a quick shower, then jogged over to the start, which was about a mile and a half And I was young and fit, so it was not a big deal. If the picture is me squatting at the start line because I'm a little tired from the drive, and so I'm saving my legs. And the picture was posted because today's Pat Devaney birthday, and happens to be the blonde standing next to me. And he was the promo director for Reebok later on in the 80s. So I ran the boulder, and luckily it worked out. And the first time I ran with my wife was 2 days later on our Tuesday afternoon workout. So quite a extending week for me, going down
Yeah.
and running the boulder, having dinner with my wife or my future wife for the first time after a track session.
Then from that day onward, what was your involvement with Boulder?
I ran decently until the last mile. I forgot to hydrate, which was not a good idea on a hot afternoon on May. And so I wilted, but still placed in my age group. And I had a terrible time at the finish because it was clogged. They really had a backlog going into the chutes. So I went up to the race director and told him that they had done a very poor job organizing it. And he looked at me and says, "You think you can do better?" I said, "Yes, I can." Next year, I was on their board, and I slowly evolved into becoming their invited athletes coordinator and took care of all the invited athletes. I introduced the first international athlete to the race. That was Rodolfo Gomez, who broke 29 minutes and set the course record. So I got entrenched, and the Boulder Road Runners, the club that I had founded, became the backbone in terms of the volunteer and marshaling part of the race. For over 25 years, I was involved with the Boulder on a yearly basis. And then my sons grew up in it and ran in it. My oldest ran it starting at age 5. Our lives as a family and my wife and I revolved around the Boulder because we engineered bringing athletes in. And this is before the era where they had a big hotel as the host. So I set up all the host families, which created some great friendships and some great bridges to keep bringing athletes in. So it was a really key part of my life and a very important part to the community.
Yeah, that's very cool. I wanted to ask you about your involvement with other international athletes. I talked about your coaching in Ecuador. You also had some Kenyan athletes. You have any stories about them?
I guess my biggest name would have been Simeon Keegan, who came out of Mississippi State. Simeon and I bumped into each other at a race in Denver. The Dr. Scholl's Pro Classic. They had a series going on. Simeon and I hooked up. He moved to Boulder, and I began training him. And then he ran 27:41 for the 10,000 in his debut uh, at Mount Sac, losing only to Ed Eyestone. So we were off to a good start. I turned him into a marathoner, and he was probably one of the top marathoners in the country. Did a great job in Chicago at his debut. He was the last guy that turned Steve Jones loose when he set his world record. Simeon set the course record and obliterated the field in the 84 San Francisco Marathon, running 2:10 and change. That race was directed by the late Mike Finelli. And so that was one of my favorite memories with Simeon. He also set the world record for 12 feet at the run between the bridges. And outstanding athlete. Unfortunately, he was never allowed to be on their Olympic team because of politics, and also crossed the immigration status that he had here at the US and was forced to go back to Kenya.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about one other person. He came up when I was chatting with a guy I ran in high school with who was in Georgia, and he attended a seminar where Joe Vigil was the speaker. Adams State, giant success. They were running against the Edinburgh guys from my part of the country back then. Did you know Joe Vigil?
Very well. Joe was one of the first people to welcome me to coaching in Colorado. He was at Adams State when I began my graduate work at Colorado. Being a Latino and Mexican like Joe, he extended a warm welcome and always was a mentor. We have some great stories together. He and I roomed together in Brussels at the World Cross Country Championships. Also did it in Lausanne. He was also very helpful in introducing me to other people within the IAAF, making connections, especially in my conjunction with the Boulder. We had international teams. I think a lot of people know that we have a lot of international runners that have appeared at the Boulder, and Joe was instrumental in making that connection. When we went to the first team challenge in 98, the first phone call I made was to Joe Behill. I said, here's what they want to do. Will you help me? He says, absolutely. I said, and the second thing is, I want you to help head the US team and bring in Dina Castro. He
Oh,
agreed. And so we were off and running. He also helped me with Abdi and with Meb. Joe was great. It was really great being with him because going into any place, I always seemed like I was going to have an opportunity to meet people that I'd never encountered before, and he would smooth the path. But if you want to know the kind of person Joe Vico was, and my son is the one who related this, the host hotel for the Boulder was Millennium. My son happened to be working the front desk. He was a student at Colorado. He was working the front desk. And Joe walked up to him and he saw his name. And he says, are you Rich's son? He goes, yes, Antonio. And he goes, here's what I want you to do. Gave him some money. He says, you get your mom some flowers because she is the one doing all the work behind your dad. He got my wife some flowers. And so I said, that's the kind of individual he was. He always thought of others, and he was very helpful in everything I ever tried to do.
and you guys weren't neighbors so much, both in Colorado, but that's Adams State. That's quite a hike away from Boulder.
Yes, it is. It's quite a drive. It takes about 6-7 hours to get there most of the time. But Joe would bring his guys up to Boulder and run in our early season meet a lot of times. And we'd see each other, obviously, at track meets around the US, because he had some top guys. In 84, I bumped into him at New York when the US hosted the first World Cross at the Meadowlands. And he was coaching Pat Porter at that point. Always a pleasant encounter with Joe because he was very helpful, as I said, to everything.
Yeah, he made a nice impression on my friend Jim Lambert, who was a Pennsylvania cross country, finished second in the state in cross country. We were teammates. He later was a coach and in Atlanta, and he met Joe there. I wanted to say something else here and see if this can go. We talked off the record that there are lots of stories that you can't tell for recording because you've been involved in the sport for so long and seen so many things, both the good and the bad. But probably just trying to fit this into one episode is missing too much. I think we've done it. I've had a chance to do a nice profile of you and let people who haven't met you get to know you, and people do know you will hear this. And maybe we can get back together and just whenever you feel like having another session of storytelling, do some more recording.
Yeah, like I said, I've had a very blessed career and I've got some great stories that have happened to me. And I was just lucky to be part of so many things, like riding that press truck and watching Steve Jones' world record unfold and watching some of my favorite athletes get involved with my family. Because my wife has stories about them. 84 Olympic champion Carlos Lopes is the first one that comes to mind. Carlos came to visit me. I helped him secure the shoes he needed to run the marathon in 84. And people always ask, what can we do for you? And I always just said, hey, come to Boulder to meet our community. And Carlos did. So I brought him in preparation to get ready for Chicago. But we went to a 10K in Denver. I said, why don't you run for our club? There's a club championship and you and Simeon can team up and run for our club. And he said, sure, that'd be fun. So anyway, long story short, he and Simeon go 1-2. And at the prize ceremony, the governor's naming all these top athletes. And then Carlos looks over and sees my wife very distraught. And I'm going, what's going on? Our little 2-year-old has wandered away in the crowd and she can't find him. So Carlos gets off the award ceremony, and people know who he is, obviously, at this point. So they're getting out of his way. He goes, hunts my little 2-year-old son, Antonio, down, grabs him, brings him back. And so to make sure he didn't get lost after that, I put him on my shoulders. And there's a picture of me and Simeon and Carlos on my Facebook page. with my 2-year-old on my shoulders, and my wife was eternally grateful for locating our little one. And
Yeah, lots of talent there.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Does your wife enjoy being on camera?
she just stepped into the room.
Yeah, I saw her go by. Well,
Oh,
maybe a fun thing to do would be to get the 2 of you to tell stories from the angle that the things that you did together, because your family involvement, like you said, revolving around at Boulder as a hook.
yeah, it definitely was an interesting time because, like I said, she was thrust in the middle of it, for better or for worse, and whether she liked it or not. Because I remember the look she gave me one day when we were bringing athletes in from the airport, and she comes in from either work or groceries, and the room is filled with nothing but international athletes, all waiting to get picked up by their host families. They were everywhere. They were sitting on the stairs and stuff. But the athletes were all part of our family. We have pictures of Martin Titayo, who won Chicago and also won Boulder, one of the top Mexican runners, uh, chatting it up with my sons. And so, like I said, they were always part of it. And we have a great picture on Facebook of my oldest throwing a rock at Rosamoda. And sure, she's our babysitter, and he's got a rock in his right hand, and he's getting ready to throw it at her. And Rose is over there going, "No, you don't want to do that." So, like I said, that they grew up with it, and like I said, those are all the stories that colored our lives because it never was dull for us, and it was always a great adventure.
Would you have a chat with your wife about that specifically? Then in a month or two, I'll get the both of you on just to tell stories from the home.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, because that's something I haven't done. I did one of these with 2 runners. It's interesting. It'll be out just before yours. 2 New York runners. They were one was a county winner and things like that, but they trained together. They were 4 years apart. One of them became a policeman and has now special services. He's over in Africa now, and he talked about he wasn't an elite athlete at all, but how running definitely saved his life. He ran for the New York Police Department against the fire department. The 2 of them trained together after they both graduated from high school, so it's an interesting story of that time together. He has one story, I don't know, he said, "I'm not gonna name names," and then he said, "But the guy has the same last name as me," and he talked about catching a Olympian with drugs in the car, and he said, "You know what?" When he saw his driver's license, he said, "You get 1 chance." He said, "If I ever see you again," but it's just great stories of running inner city New York of these guys in the '70s. It's pretty interesting, but that's the only time I had 2 people on, and they knew each other really well. They weren't interrupting it was very polite and crossing over each other. Very different personalities. The one guy's a guy like me in terms of living a lot in some places most people don't wanna go, and, so being very comfortable with people that are different and very just transparent and authentic guy, another one, yeah.
I definitely relate to the idea that running has saved a lot of people's lives. And I think that's the common denominator. It set us on the right path and given us the ability to do goal setting and get us out of our existence. Like I said, I'm not sure where my life would have gone if I hadn't discovered running. And, but it's,
Yeah,
teams become your family. And so that's
yeah.
the whole thing, the friendships you strike up. And so it's all good.
Thanks again for your time, Rich, and, yeah,
Well,
I'll grab some photos from your Facebook thing, and I'll put them out on a little album, and you can see what they look like, and then if you say, "Hey, here's a bunch more I'd like out there."
almost everything's on there. There's one of my favorites I posted recently of me running with the Olympic torch in '64. So that's
Wow.
in high school. We did a fundraiser for the Tokyo Olympics, and I'm running on US Highway 101, and it's my senior year. So,
There's
like
not many corners of this sport you haven't, touched, yeah.
I said, I've been very blessed.
Is there anything else that you wanna get in here or reach out or any names you wanna call out, the people you wanna
Well,
say hi to?
I mentioned Roland Nortmeyer, my coach in college, but I should warn you, as people say, he's got a million stories, and if you just hang around long enough, she'll tell you all of them. You don't want to hear all the ones because I've had some great adventures, and Like I said, sometimes people think that I'm making these stories up. And I said, I couldn't tell you how many stories people think are fictitious. Watching Rob DiCostella storm to a 2:07 marathon while riding on top of a VW minibus with his coach. I said, because we didn't have a press truck. I've had some experiences that folks could never duplicate. Watching my athletes compete, winning awards, winning medals, being champions within their own countries, and sending them back to do good works and good things and continue to spread the word. I can't get better thanks than that.
Yeah, I think you deserve a lot of thanks. I think your legacy is going to last quite a long time through many generations. It's obvious the impact you've had and the joy it brought you and the joy it brought a lot of other people. What of these stories have been documented, and what are your thoughts on having somebody record all these and write them? How many have been written down?
None, because like I said, I've been asked by several authors to write a book, and I said, my only problem is that I have certain regrets because I witnessed some things that I'm not proud of and sorts I was forced to be part of. And I said, I know where the bodies are buried, and I really don't want to offend anybody with the details. I said, I've had some great experiences. I've had some wonderful memories connected with sport, but I've also had some regrets. We've got a dark side in our sport, and I watched some of that stuff unfold and really don't want to relive it.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll cut this out. Maybe I'll just leave you with this thought. You probably could get an arrangement where the book wouldn't be published for 100 years. And no, you wouldn't hurt anybody who's alive today. So I don't know. I may come back and bug you with this idea
No,
because the amazing history that's in your thing. But if it isn't, even if it's if it's unpleasant, I'm sure it'd be hard to revisit. But there is precious history that's in you. Thanks for sharing what you could.
all right. Thank you for the opportunity. All right. Take care, my friend.
All right. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.